the most inefficient form of media possible, an industry that is literally dying. Not just pump out simple content on social media. What photos do I have the legal right? KSI and Logan Paul's launched Prime, Beta Squad's failed meet and greet, the Yes Theory team. Ideally, I'd love to get this down to the same price as a Vogue magazine. I look at it and I don't know if it's amazing or terrible.
Parker Flores is a young creator with a crazy idea. Instead of creating a bunch of swipe content, he went old school and published a magazine, like a physical print magazine. He spent 8 months and countless hours putting something together people can hold in their hands. But is anybody going to read it, or does he have a completely different reason for making it? In this episode, you learn why print still matters, how you can tackle big projects, and about the secret power of community. But first, let's find out how it started.
I've been taking photos ever since I was a kid, probably for well over a decade now. The magazine is really just a culmination of all of these years taking photos, having them on my computer, maybe sharing them with a few friends, but not really having something tangible where I can just flip through and see everything that I have taken over a period of time and even combine together with some information that can add more depth to the moments that I had captured. And the last year, that's when this moment I think really came about because I kind of finished uni. I was sort of going into a bit of a gap here, and it's like, well, what's next? What's a project that I can really work on, really put some effort into, not just pump out simple content on social media that you often do, where it's like, sweet, just get stuff out for the sake of getting stuff out, but something that has a bit more of my soul in it.
It's so easy to put out content. Everybody's talking about you got to push out reels, shorts, TikTok, like all the vertical formats. And like, it's so easy to reach a million people. And you're like, nah, man, I'm going to make a print magazine.
The most inefficient form of media possible, an industry that is literally dying financially in terms of like gross distribution and takes a lot more work than some of the videos I've put out that have got millions of views. So yes, definitely it
Hmm.
doesn't make sense at all on the surface.
What compelled you to go down that route? I mean, it's not just like a crazy idea to have. You really followed through all the way to distribution. I can buy this now. Like, you really followed through on that crazy idea.
Yeah, I think it's been about 8 months from literally opening the first folder to now having this officially launched. There are some selfish reasons, and then there are some like, community based reasons. And I think the selfish reasons, so for one, having some tangible photos in front of me. Two, it acts as like a perfect business card. If someone asks me, what do I do? Because us producing content, we always find it a struggle trying to describe what we do to people. But if I hand them a magazine, they're like, well, you can take photos, you can write, and you know a lot about your space and you have the patience and ability to put something like this together. So I find that if I need to pitch myself to people, hopefully this acts as a phenomenal business card for that. And then additionally, I found that trying to get access to events can be extremely difficult because you either have a lot of money, you either have to have a large following, so they're like, yes, we want you because you can bring attention, or you have to work for a publisher. So to be able to gain access to fun events, like I don't know, could be music concerts or could be whatever it may be, I need to be part of a publisher. And probably the easiest way to do that, well, I don't know about the easiest, but I thought, well, why don't I become my own? And that can potentially be a way where I can start getting access to cooler events that I can then capture, which then can give me more access to more events, and it becomes a perpetuating cycle. And I think on the community aspect, I've always been interested in the news and media space. And me, as I'm sure a lot of people have felt, that the current fourth pillar of democracy has been letting us down in terms of upholding certain ethics of information distribution. And I think this is sort of a first step to hopefully trying to restabilize this industry and help perpetuate information and inspiration and motivation to a generation of people that feel so lost in an industry and in a world that we're defining as we walk it. The whole internet space, you can't look at your parents and see what they've done. That just doesn't exist anymore. What we are doing, we are the first people to take the steps that are ahead of us. It's a combination of all of those factors is why I spent so long putting this together, and hopefully for future ones I can get out much quicker.
This idea of you just become your own publisher, you're like the editor in chief, head photographer, whatever the title is, and now you can just like, yeah, I have a magazine, can I come to your event? That's a hard route, but I think it very well could pay off for you for sure. How did these photos come about in the first place? Because you were in Australia right now, and it's not like I don't think of it as a creator hotspot, but then you have KSI on the cover.
While there are some cool people in Australia, obviously you have some of the biggest gamers in the world in Melbourne, and you have lots of independent creators who are really cool, doing some really amazing things. It isn't a group, it isn't quite a community yet. And Australia, I think I heard a comedian say it once, but it's like about as far away as you can get from the UK and US while still being English speaking, while still being familiar. So it's exotic, but still comfortable enough for people to go traveling. But when I was choosing photos, I kind of sat down and said, what photos do I have the legal right to publish? And there seemed to be a very clear through line through there. And it was a bunch of creators that I had photographed who had come to Sydney. And I noticed the through line was about communities and their strong attachment to that. So those photos being, which turned into the chapters, KSI and Logan Paul's launch of Prime in Australia, Beta Squad's failed meet and greet in Sydney, the Yes Theory team coming down and performing with Murray, Redwiggle, Cook, and then, just as a sort of side thing, Tim Hayden, who's a British TikToker that I met in Amsterdam serendipitously. The KSI and Logan Paul meetup, that was they were meant to have one in Perth and Melbourne, and I think both of those were cancelled because of safety concerns. And the Sydney one was also cancelled because of safety concerns, which thank God, because it was going to be held in the center of the city on the tram line above the train station. It would not have ended well, but then it ended up being moved last minute to across the bridge, like in a tiny little back alleyway. There was probably was it thousands, maybe like a couple thousand, low thousands of people gathered, like underneath this balcony to see them sort of come out and announce the launch of Prime within Australia, which was kind of ironic because you could already get Prime in Australia. My friend just managed to find some bottle of Prime here in Australia, so I'm going to go back to that same shop and see if they've still got some. And what was, I think, really smart about it, which is what I write about in the magazine a bit, is that it kind of appeals to everyone, even if you don't know who they are. Because if you know who they are and like them, you're going to show up. If you know who they are and don't like
Yeah.
them, you're going to complain about them to your friends and online. If you don't know who they are, you're like, well, who are these people that I've never heard of that are bringing such a crowd? Probably my kids, or at least my friends' kids. So I think there are a lot of factors there that
Yeah.
were able to make it such a huge event, especially in the mainstream press. And then with Beta Squad's meetup, I think what made that notable in particular and such an interesting event to document is that it was absolute chaos. It's what KSI and Logan's would have been if it was in the city. Because not only was it on a weekend, so school kids could show up, they had no means
Yeah.
of like getting over the crowd and then leaving again. They had just set a little park because they'd met up in Melbourne a couple of days prior and it was pretty chill. So they had chosen a random park on a weekend, and people were just chasing each other's tails. They would hear some sort of scream and then go that way, and people were just running in circles. And 45 minutes later, they finally come sprint to a little stage area, and then they get stuck. They try
Wow.
and bring the other half of the members in. They can't even get in. The police just don't let them. So after ages and ages of just trying to have some sort of meet and greet, it just doesn't work, and they have to surround themselves with 6 bodyguards just to escape. And once again, it has the same principle of appealing to all of those demographics. I mean, I had an old lady. Well, I mean, she was probably like 60s, whatever, but comparatively to the demographic that was there, as they were trying to escape, she was saying to me, "Oh, I don't understand kids these days. Like, why are they making such a fuss?" And it's like, "Have you heard of the Beatles? Have you heard of like the Spice Girls?" Like, it's the exact same sort of fandom, and it doesn't mean that people should be that crazy and create that sort of dangerous environment, but it's just the next generation of celebrity that people are attached to. And I think really understanding what builds those communities, whether that be just on a understanding the world sense or because you're trying to build your own business or marketing funnel or whatever that may be, I think is really important there. And once again, how to do it right and not cause that chaos, but actually continue to build that depth in whatever outcome you're trying to wield.
So one thing that keeps coming through what you're saying is like there's a sense of responsibility, ethics, like thinking a step ahead beyond just like make cool content and reach people. There's this like journalistic aspect to what you're doing. Is this something you studied for? Is that in your family? How did this develop for you?
I studied media at uni, which most of it was pretty
Uh-huh.
useless until third year when they started delving into stuff like ethics and whatever. And that's when it actually got interesting. But I have always had an interest in media production. I mean, as a kid, I did stop motions, and then that kind of moved into photography and creating little videos and doing magic performances and just a whole range of different things. And I think as you start aging up and start becoming politically aware, you start seeing the faults of the system that is and this desire to change it. And I was working on a political startup, media startup with a friend back in uni, and we decided to just part ways for a while because, I mean, trying to delve really into that is just depressing to look at the news all day. So
Mm.
it's like, can we wield the same outcome of pushing this level of ethics again and motivating people and inspiring people and helping them learn about new spaces and industries, but in a way that was not only healthier to us, but potentially more engaging to a wider audience? Like if on the news, for example, you're talking about inclusion and acceptance and equality, great, that's fine, but it doesn't really attach to people. But if you have yes theory making inspiring videos about traveling the world and meeting people from completely different cultures, that has a much greater impact than the prior.
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that's why it's so important to understand how all of this works, because assuming you're well intentioned, you can have a very big positive impact on the world if you do it right.
And you can have a very huge influence with a very simple video, right?
Oh,
And
absolutely.
I think that's something we're just coming to see now is this like what is the responsibility of being a creator? Because a lot of us just started by themselves just doing whatever was fun, and now a lot of them are feeling kind of the consequences of having a large audience without an editor in chief, without like some kind of legal framework around it or whatever it is. So
What
yeah.
PewDiePie, David Dobrik, Logan Paul, those are probably the key milestones for when people kept realizing, oh, we've got to have systems in place to make sure that we don't do something wrong that creates huge backlash towards us. And I mean, when PewDiePie's incident occurred years ago, it pretty much, not just that, but there was a number of things where the whole platform got demonetized. And
Is this whole subject of media education something you talk about online? Is this just something you're dealing with for yourself? Is this part of the, I don't know, your publishing pillars, I guess?
at the moment, I produce content around the creator economy and my sort of journey growing within the space. And part of that has delved into things like I made a video recently about the ethics of interviews and me having to edit a debate between the representatives of the Greens and Conservatives within my uni and the sort of struggles that you have to go with. You know, you have an over an hour interview and you're having to narrow that down into 20 minutes. So, how do you still convey everyone's points while cutting out the majority of what they had to say? Make sure that everyone feels represented and all the other problems that come with that. So I think it is something that I'm really trying to push more and more and hopefully delve a bit more into the deeper philosophical side of things on top of just documenting cool things that happen within the space, like I document in the magazine, but being able to find a way to combine those two things. So you have the entertainment factor that people want to click onto, like they get the dessert of seeing KSI, but then the vegetables of what does this mean for documenting such event or the event as a whole or the business and marketing strategies behind it all. And I think combining those two things really has that best effect there, and is when you get the most out of a movie that you watch or a YouTuber that you really value.
And now the magazine has been out for a little bit more than a week. Have you already seen any effects of it, or do you feel like print in general is having like a moment, so to speak?
I mean, because I'm still on the way up, I don't have the same effect as someone like a Colin and Samir with their newspaper. I don't expect in the early stages to receive a massive number of sales, obviously, because I've yet to build that deep parasocialized audience where people can trust that what I produce will deliver value, especially when you have to put money on the table. There's a difference to clicking a thumbnail, but actual money takes a lot of trust that I'm still on the way to building. But I think that, I mean, probably half the demographics I've shown it to have been middle aged people with kids. And from the feedback I've received from them, they've finally got a glimpse into who are their kids idolizing and the reasons for that. And it's been really interesting talking to them because they're from a completely different perspective. And they were one of the demographics I tried to hit. Like, it's like, how can I write this in a way where if you know who these people are, you're still going to get something interesting out of it because it maybe points to different perspectives or ideas or information. But if you don't know who they are, you're also going to be interested because it's not just going straight into the deep end. You have just enough context to understand what's going on, but not so much that people who already know get bored. So I think there's a couple layers there of people that it tries to impact. And so far, I've gotten good feedback from it. But I mean, once you're in it for 8 months, I look at it and I don't know if it's amazing or terrible because I've seen it so much over this time. But from when people have opened it up, they've seemed to give a good praise. So I'm glad that it's at least been somewhat worth it.
But there are these pieces of evidence for print having like a moment of a comeback, kind of like vinyl, right? Like the published press magazine, what you're doing. I'm having a few people locally who like have newsletters, but then a quarterly print issue, right? So I'm just wondering, is there desire from people, even younger people, to get things into their hands?
I haven't looked at the numbers for it, but I mean, at least the benefit of a physical product is it creates a further attachment to the person that it's connected to. Like if you buy a bottle of Prime, you feel more attached to KSI and Logan. If you buy a published press newspaper, you feel attached to Colin and Samir, or you buy a like what it came with one of the packages, a Yes Theory flag. Once again, you feel a part of that community. And I think well, I mean, it's the same reason why people have sports jerseys, right? You want to feel like you're part of that community, whatever that thing represents. You want to know your tribe when you're out in the street. And I think that's probably what it plays into most is that sort of tribalism, wanting to feel part of that community, wanting to feel connected. But I mean, when you've looked at sales of, let's say, just the traditional physical product space, magazines have been on a steep decline. But I don't know whether
Of
that's
course.
because people don't want to buy them or because they're just terrible the way they're currently designed. I mean, I'll buy magazines and stores and it's 50% ads. They're very good at trying to weave the ads as if they're part of the content, but they're just not. Or I'll go through a photography magazine and 70% of the photos are just terrible. So if someone can
Yeah.
actually produce a physical product that delivers well on the photography component, can deliver well on the content, informational, inspirational component, and can get it in front of the right people at the right price, like I don't see why people wouldn't be interested because you love going through magazines at the airport and while you're flying or whatever that at the dentist or the hairdresser. So I think in the right place, it has value and interest.
And are you planning to do this regularly? Like, is there any scheduling plan, or is it just like a one-off experiment and you see how that works out?
I mean, the absolute ideal, which would be very cool, would be to do it once a month. But at that point, I would need to have a team with me, someone to. Well, probably
Yeah,
all I would need would be a writer slash designer, because then I could go out, I could produce the interviews, I could film the interviews, and then I could just give them the content for them to then write about. And I reckon a month turnaround would be possible in that situation. But while at least I'm working by myself, an ideal, like if I look at comparable sort of high, more dense magazines, maybe once a quarter might be something that is easily achievable while I'm trying to do everything else, while I'm trying to earn enough money to survive in London, while trying to produce the digital content on the side. By being a one man band, I reckon one a quarter could be achievable in that regard, which would be very nice to do.
it's definitely a way to stand out from the crowd. That's for sure. Do you have any thoughts on what success looks like to you as a creator?
I think there are probably a number of factors. And I mean, I'm sure you know yourself because of what you do. There's that element of actually bringing value to the audience or the people you interact with. So I think there is the biggest success is hearing anecdotal stories from people of the effect that you've had on them. And it doesn't necessarily just come through the
Interesting.
content, but it can also just come through in person interactions with friends. And you'll say something that you didn't really think that was big of a deal. And then they'll come back to you a week later and say, wow, I've really taken in what you've said. I've actually noticed a huge change when I look at the world through that particular perspective. So I think having that sort of impact is indeed what success is. And if you stick with that long enough, sure, the financial side of it will be there and the opportunities will be there. But the real meaningful aspect is helping the people around you because there were people who helped you along your way. So it feels good to give back in that regard, I think.
That's a really nice way to put it. And yes, I've definitely experienced that before, where it's just like somebody responding back to you, like, "Oh, that one line you said that really like changed my perspective on things." That's really what we're all doing. That I feel like. But if you think of like this person who wants to create something, make a crazy project happen, but just hasn't taken that first step to go down that route, what would you tell them?
It's tough. I think the hardest thing is obviously judgment, especially in a field which is less trodden. Because if you say you want to become an athlete, people are like, oh, cool. Like, they know what that means. As long as you put the effort in, it's very clear what you have to do. But if you're trying to do something that is a bit uncomfortable, the real thing that changed for me is sure I was producing some stuff in high school, but there was that always that element of judgment. But as soon as I left, I
Hmm.
was able to just hang around the people who were supportive, who were doing just as interesting things as I was. And I think that really helps you on the journeys when you can find people also on that journey or on similar journeys that are just as motivating, just as interesting, that you can really push each other to do things that you otherwise wouldn't because you know they're working hard, so you kind of have to keep up. They've got cool stories from what they've been doing, so that keeps you motivated. It's like when you speak to someone who's really inspiring, that kind of gives you a boost of energy for a week. So trying to find, I think, as many of those people as possible can help you get over all of the other stops along the way of public judgment, laziness in terms of like, oh, I feel like I could watch TV right now. By having those motivators, it can really overpower that. And I think a clear description of that, which I thought was a great way of putting it, was in one of Johnny Harris's videos. He's a journalist on YouTube, and he described it as like a Mario Kart speed boost. When you get into a new hobby or a new interest, you get this sort of stint of motivation that can last you just
Right.
for, let's say, a
Yeah.
couple of weeks. You'll read all the boring books, you'll sit and watch through all the boring informational videos. So when you feel that, trying to take the most advantage of it. If I had known in the beginning it would have taken me 8 months, I would never have started the magazine. If I had known it would be 4 or 5 years later of producing content, I probably wouldn't have started. But by just getting over that boring and frustrating hump by having that motivation and then getting into the rhythm of it, finding the parts that you do enjoy, I think that can allow you to stick with it long enough term that you can see at least some results come out of it enough that that can then continue motivating you. Because if you don't see any results out of all the hard work, that's when you get bored, that's when you get burnt out, that's when you get frustrated. So you just need to get there long enough that you see some sort of success, some compliment, some moment of achievement. And I think with that, it becomes a lot easier to produce bigger projects, having the people around you and having those moments of success. 'Cause
Awesome. I
what
love
have
it.
you found for the stuff that you've produced a lot of your interviews and your company as a
Hmm.
whole trying to benefit creators in the creative space? What have you found has helped you push through years and years of putting this together?
Wow. I have to think about this for a second, but what really made the difference for me now is having had a few other professional experiences, right? I've had a career in filmmaking, a little bit of marketing, I've had various jobs, but now in this creator space, I just feel like I really, really believe in this idea. This is not just doing a client project because they pay you. It is, I'm doing something I really love, I believe in, and I know is going to have a positive impact. And that is what keeps me going every single day. And then connecting with other people, and like when you tell somebody about your idea or your what you're working on, and they go like, "Oh wow, that sounds so interesting. That sounds so cool." It's just like, "Ah, okay, I'm on the right path here." So these moments are really what keep me going.
Definitely agree when you're doing something a little bit different, that can really spark intrigue from people. And if they're intrigued, it means there's something there that you can latch onto.
Yeah.
So I definitely agree with
Yes.
that. But I mean, when people ask, what do you do? It's always that dilemma of like, what demographic are they? Will they quite understand? So I kind of always just say photographer because it's the most easily understandable thing. And depending on the
Yeah.
demographic, I might slightly weave in something about content. And then from there, I can decide, do I leave it at that? Or are they also sort of interested in this space or have some curiosity that you can go on a whole conversation about?
What's been really interesting to see is everybody's calling themselves a content creator on YouTube or YouTuber, whatever. And I feel like this is changing. We're getting more specific. And then me personally, I've been more and more involved with journalistic organizations and seeing myself as a journalist more and more because, you know, I'm doing interviews, understanding other people's perspective and their reasoning. And that's a very classic TV journalism format, right? And so this is actually, out of all the job titles I ever had, one that I feel really, really comfortable with.
Yeah, I think by you identifying yourself as that, it creates a sort of pattern of behavior or way of acting and approach to the world. Like if you identify as someone who exercises every day, you will do that even if you don't feel like doing it. If you identify as a journalist, you'll probably pay attention to certain behaviors and ways of interviewing and ethical dilemmas that maybe the average person wouldn't because it's not really their point of interest or expertise. So I definitely agree with that, that there's some value in the way that you look at yourself and not just seeing yourself as a content creator or influencer because there's certain connotations with that, but by seeing yourself as what is the underlying fact there. Like I was just fixing up my website before and I didn't label Yes Theory as YouTubers, I labeled them as filmmakers. Because while they produce content on YouTube, there's a different underlying element there. You know, Johnny Harris, yes, he's technically a YouTuber, but really he's a journalist. You know, Logan Paul and KSI, they're YouTubers, but they're really entertainers in a variety of fields. So I think really getting to that underlying core there helps create an understanding of what are you actually, and what is the audience there to see.
Yeah,
So yeah, I think there's a lot of value in that.
absolutely. Yeah. Because, like, I feel like a lot of us have been defined by the platform that they mainly publish on. And now we're seeing a shift towards the thing that you're doing, right? The action, basically, what is defining you, which is what it should be, anyways, in the first place.
Yeah, if you're I don't know, a journalist or a producer publishing in a newspaper, you don't call yourself a newspaperer. Like you are what that original
Yes.
action was. And the creator industry, I think the reason creator works so much better than the typical YouTuber or whatnot is because there are so many jobs that aren't just in front of the camera. You know, your camera, you have the
Yes.
host, but then behind the scenes, you have the videographer, and then you have the editors and thumbnail designers and the producers and everything else that goes into this entire process. So having better terminology that's more descriptive in an industry that is much more deep than it used to be 10 years ago, I think really helps not only provide a path for people trying to come into the space that may not want to be on camera, but also really help create identities for the people who are working behind the scenes, dignified identities that aren't just thrown into the influencer category who are shilling out for a couple of bucks, but are actually trying to produce value within whatever content and whatever platform that may be.
Yeah. So if people want to find out what you're up to, how your journey in London is going, and maybe get the magazine, where can people find you? What's the best way to stay in your orbit?
Luckily, my name is extremely unique. If you look me up on Google, I'm the only one there, just being Parker Flores on effectively every single platform. And there you should be able to hopefully get an inside glimpse into the side of the creator economy or the world that you haven't really seen before. That is the goal, and that is what I will continue to try and produce. So hop along on the ride because it's going to be an interesting one, especially in this short term.
And if you want more of this, all conversations are available as full audio podcasts. And in the Orbit newsletter, you get even more inspiring insights from all kinds of creators. But now it's time to create.